Now, last but not least, I will give the floor to Dubai Abulhoul. You founded the think tank in Emirates, Fiker Institute, on slightly global governance and a lot of the issues we addressed today. What are your thoughts regarding exactly this overall discussion?
Thank you very much, first of all, President Macron, for your very kind invitation and for convening us to discuss quite an existential question facing our international community today. I have to say, though, that the geographic diversity represented on this panel today gives me a great hope, because more often than not, when these kinds of debates take place, particularly in this part of the world, it always seems one-sided. So thank you very much for breaking the mold and actually opening up the discussion. Growing up in the Middle East, for some reason, it always seemed that the word global has been too closely synonymous with the word Western. So no matter how much we aspired to contribute to global issues like climate change, like women's rights, like avoiding the next financial crisis, it always seemed like we were cornered into a position where we had to look like the West for us to be considered good enough to become global citizens. So that represents quite a lot of frustrations from our region. And I have to say, I am a multilateralist. I believe that multilateralism should not just be a policy preference. It is, in fact, the only way forward. But we also have to honestly address the growing wave of skepticism towards globalization, the growing skepticism towards universalism, and not to always equate that with populist narratives or far-right rhetoric. There are very valid criticisms that we need to address in order for us to truly have an international community that is representative of us all. And on that, I would like to share 3 ideas at the top of my head that we can hopefully unpack in more detail throughout this panel and beyond. And the first one is, and I think that is the most obvious in the Middle East, is the unequal weight given to different crises and conflicts around the world based on purely where they are geographically located. Why is it that when a crisis erupts in the Middle East, for example, we all should just consider it, a daily headline in the news, or we just scroll past it on Twitter while we still have Twitter as we know it. But when something erupts perhaps closer, when a crisis of an equal scale erupts closer to Europe, that is automatically considered an international crisis, an international priority. And the issue is not just the unequal weight given on placed on how critical a crisis is. It is the unequal weight placed on human life that is getting increasingly harder to ignore. The second idea is how multilateral institutions, which are tasked with protecting the best interests of our international community, aren't actually representative of the entire international community. So the power dynamics that govern our multilateral institutions today are not reflective of the realities of 2022. They still echo the power dynamics of 1945. And that is something that requires a very bold, honest, and serious reform agenda, whether we're talking about the disproportionate number of judges on the ICJ when it comes to geographic representation, whether we're talking about how 5 countries to this day still govern the security or lack thereof of 190 plus countries in the United Nations, you name it. These are very serious pressing issues, and until we implement actual global reform, we risk reducing our multilateral organizations, which are the only ones we have. We risk having them disappear into, quite frankly, irrelevance, and that is in no one's best interest. And the third idea, and last that I would like to leave you with, is a very strange dichotomy that I've noticed growing in Western media and in Western rhetoric, which is a very binary view of the world. An us versus them framing of the international community, or perhaps the more condescending one that I've seen appear, whether it's on election trails or different media outlets, the West versus the rest. As if we can bucket the majority of the majority of countries in the international community into one bucket against the West is something that is not only counterproductive, but is actually a very fictional construct that limits so much of what we can do together on climate change, on women's rights, on the recovery of our economies post-pandemic. So it is within these limitations that we need to honestly debate and honestly discuss, and only then can we actually have true universalism that benefits all of the international community and not just one region over the other. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci Dubai.
Thank you. Thank you, Dubai. Stakeholder approach.
Pour ce faire, on a besoin de réformer nos institutions.
We have to reform our institutions. You said this very well.
Internationales qui ne
Dubai.
représentent plus comme